Welcome to the Well-Seasoned Librarian podcast. Today is Season 5, Episode 10. Today I have on the program Katerina Nitsou, who has written the book Macedonia, the Cookbook. Katerina began working on the book Macedonia, the Cookbook a long time ago, and it took Nitsou and her husband about 6 years to complete it. Katerina had a drive to showcase the vibrant and colorful foods of Macedonia, her ancestral land. As a Macedonian woman, she wanted to teach and share with others the beautiful food from this glorious part of the world. Nitsou is a classically trained chef, originally from Toronto and now residing in Melbourne, Australia. She lived in Los Angeles for 15 years and owned her own private chef and catering company for 5 years. She had a privilege of cooking for many Los Angeles elites and celebrities then. Nitsou has also written a series of recipes published in the Los Angeles Times. Her husband, Oliver Fitzgerald, photographed each recipe in the book lovingly. The book was truly a labor of love and a beautiful project they shared together. The book is out and available through major retailers like Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and the link is in the bio. And after that, we're going to take you right to the conversation that I had with Katerina. Normally, I have a kind of standard welcoming that I do, but we just fell into conversing so well like old friends that I just kept the original formatting of the conversation and to keep it more natural. So onward we go now with Katerina Nitsou, the author of Macedonia, a Cookbook.
Doing?
I'm doing great. How about you?
Yeah, good. It's quite hot here in Melbourne today.
I can imagine.
And sorry, where in, because you're in the US, right? Where in the US are you?
So I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area right now. I'm in Emeryville, which people never heard of. It's near Berkeley.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so right between Oakland.
Well, I lived in Los Angeles for 15 years, so I do know California fairly well, but I haven't been to where you are.
Yeah, I was reading your bio. You've lived all over the world. Am I correct?
Not really. I mean, I was born and raised in Toronto, and then I moved to Los Angeles. My husband is from Melbourne, but he worked in the film industry at that time. So we sort of met, and then I moved there when I was quite young, and then lived there for many, many years. And then we just made the decision to come back to Melbourne. He had some job opportunities that came up for him. So we made the move here in the height of the pandemic in 2020. So we came here, but we had made the decision to move here well before the world changed. But it's been good so far.
Yeah, and like a lot of the world, like California especially, there's been a lot of wildfires there. Were you affected by any of that?
We were in many years. Like there was a lot of times that we were implicated by the wildfires and stuff in California, but it's also a cause for concern in Australia as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've been lucky, but we've been surrounded by it up here. So we've been so far, knock on wood, we don't have any more.
Yeah, it's so heartbreaking.
So now you're a classically trained chef, and you've also been an interior designer and real estate agent.
Yeah, so I finished business school. I studied at a university in Toronto, and then when I moved to California, I transferred to finish my business degree in the US, and that was sort of how I came to the US on a student visa. And I when I graduated, it was 2008, and it was sort of, with the financial crisis that was happening at that time, it would have been really difficult for me to find a job with a company that would have been willing to, sponsor me for a visa to stay. And then I'd studied business for 6 years. And at that point I was sort of burnt out a little bit anyway. And I was like, I just want to go back and study something fun and that I'm passionate about, and always loved food and always loved to cook. So I decided to extend my student visa and attend culinary school, which I did and I loved. It was an amazing experience. And then I ran in Los Angeles. I ran my own private chef and catering company for about 7 years, where I cooked for, so I do sort of a lot of different things. Sometimes I would do weddings. Sometimes I would do like intimate dinner parties. And then I had a couple clients that I cooked for on a regular basis as well. And then kind of around the 7 or 8 year mark, I started to sort of pivot into real estate. My husband and I, kind of always have loved design and architecture. And we started to sort of dabble in buying, some small properties and renovating them. And I really enjoyed that process as well. So I pivoted from food into the world of real estate and design. And actually that's still, what I do with my time. I work for an interior architecture firm here in Australia at the moment. So food is always there and always a passion. And it's always going to be part of the fabric of our life. But the cookbook sort of progressed through all of those phases, really. It was always like this project that we had worked on in the background, and we sort of would chip away at it and, would sort of I'd write the recipes and I'd test them. And then, my husband, who was a cinematographer, he did all the photography for the book.
Wow,
For the
it's
food,
because he did great
photography.
Work. Beautiful stuff.
Yeah, thank you. He's very, very talented. The book actually was nominated for a Gourmand Award, and one of the categories that it was nominated was photography. So we're quite proud of him. He did a really great job. So
was the publisher eager to have you do that, or did you have to kind of fight for that? Because there's a very definite, really strong, really beautiful look to the book. It's gorgeous, as you said, because it won awards. Did you have to? Because I know not all publishers are willing to kind of let people go with what they want. Did you have trouble with that?
No, actually, what ended up happening in my circumstance was we had written the book. We had completely finished it. And so we had done all the photography. And at that time, I know most authors kind of get a publishing deal and sort of go through the process of writing it. Whereas we were a little bit opposite in that, where I just did it and I didn't know where it was going to go, really. It was sort of just a passion project. And in my mind, I really genuinely thought, well, if this is just something that, maybe we print a couple copies and, our family has some copies, and it's just something, in our legacy that like we leave for our children and, my nieces and nephews. I wasn't really, I'd always hoped that it would go further than that, but it was never the motivation for writing the book. We always just did it to do it. And it was something that I felt very strongly about because at the time there wasn't really a great collection of Macedonian recipes that was available to people to really showcase the food. And so what ended up happening was a very good friend of mine who is the president of the United Macedonia diaspora in Washington, his name's Meto. He knew about the book because he knew I was writing and was always, a big supporter of it. And he had a friend of his that was in publishing who I'd spoken to many years prior. And she was like, I don't really know if I can help you. And then a couple of years after that, so we'd sort of written the book and I tried to get, reach out to publishers and I tried to get literary agents. And I really was up against the wall because a lot of people were sort of like, well, you're not a celebrity chef and nobody really knows about Macedonian food. And, to my point, that was sort of like, well, that's the point of writing it. And so anyhow, a couple of years later, she reached out to me. She says, listen, I came across Interlink Publishings and they specialize in, underrepresented ethnicities in the cookbook market. So I reached out to them directly and I said, listen, I've written this book. It's all done. The photos are done. We've edited it. It's sort of ready to go. And I sent them over the manuscript and they basically said, we love it. And they came back to me with some notes on improving what was already existing there. And then they had their graphics team sort of flush out, the cover and we worked together on the points that they sort of thought that the book needed, which I totally agreed with. I think they made amazing suggestions. And then so here we are. So that's sort of how it all came about.
It's a beautiful cookbook, and
Thank you.
Amazon, it's like 5 stars all the way. Really positive feedback. And I defy anybody to look at this cookbook and not get hungry. Now, I saw a lot of examples. I didn't know anything about Macedonian cookbook, so I saw a lot of things like beets and plums and like the flatbreads and the different types of like the pastries and things. What would you characterize as typical of Macedonian cooking for the people who have not read the book?
Well, Macedonian cooking is really, Macedonia as a whole is a very agriculturally centric country. it has really great conditions that lend itself to a beautiful wider range of fruits and vegetables. So I think that, the cuisine is very simple. It's a very rustic type of cuisine. It's not particularly fussy. It's not, overly manipulated. It's really about celebrating the ingredients that are in season at the time. And because it's such an agriculturally centric society and culture, there's a lot of that. So, all of these fruits and vegetables that are featured in the book really are things that, would have been in abundance, especially like with the preserves and stuff like that. I mean, taking sort of what you received at the end of the harvest and really maximizing the use and not wasting it and that sort of stuff. Because Macedonia is landlocked from the Mediterranean,
Right.
We don't get sort of like shellfish that you get in like the Greek cuisine as an example. So
Right.
There's not like the calamari and the octopus and that type of stuff. It's a lot of freshwater fish. Like Ohrid is one of the cities. It's actually a UNESCO heritage location, and there's it's known for Ohrid trout, and it's a really beautiful fish. And so it's a lot of really simple dishes. A lot of the meat dishes are kind of braised meats or grilled meats, and it's utilizing different cuts of the animal and sort of bringing in very simple flavors to sort of just highlight the quality of the food that grows there.
Now, there's a nice selection, each chapter highlights different recipes from, starters to fish to, you really do great service to vegetables. I think as a Californian who goes to farmers markets a lot, this cookbook seems to lend itself to that, because you could really take off like in the spring and summertime. But you have a good range of stuff, like amazing soup recipes, really great meat recipes, breads and sweets. What are some of your favorites from the cookbook and things that you really like to make?
Well, some of the things that I really make often is a lot of the stews and the soups. It's certainly, for me, the recipes are very nostalgic because they're the food I grew up eating as a child. So as an example, like the meatball soup with spinach and lemon is one of my favorites. My mom always would make it for me as a child. And then when I would go home to Toronto to visit them, it's sort of one of the things I would always ask to have. A lot of the meze and stuff that we have, it was always the things that we would have, when company would come over. So like the zucchini fritters are a really great recipe, and the piperki, and which is roasted peppers, and
Yeah.
and all that sort of stuff. Actually, the roasted peppers, I think, is a pinnacle one for Macedonian cuisine. It's sort of that staple in the cuisine that is on every table. It's like sort of like the condiment, but it's not a condiment because it's not a sauce, but it's sort of like the side feature to every meal. So every meat, every soup, I mean, we always had roasted peppers, spicy or not spicy, depending on your preference. But it was sort of one of those things. And I think most Macedonians that you meet, if you ask them, like, what's the thing that's always on the table, it's piperki and probably fresh bread and some cheese. And then that sort of is the accompaniment to the rest of the meal, whatever it is that you're having. But a lot of the bread dishes, the banitsa and the bureks, are something that were always very special. My grandmother used to make.
Good. I want that so badly.
Well, you'll have to make it.
Yeah, no, I want to. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna.
Yeah.
That looks so good.
Well, that's a great recipe, because burek is really an interesting one, because it's a beautiful pastry, and it really is a skill and a craft. And my grandmothers and my aunts made it often and are really, really talented at making really beautiful dough. And the thing is it's really so much of the way they do is feel and touch and just the experience of that. And so what I did is, although I can make it, I mean, the recipe is pretty good. I would never claim to say it's better than my grandmother's, but I also developed, like in the book, you'll see, like, it's called lesna banica, and it's I found that it's sort of a quicker, easier version, and it's not quite the same as the real thing, but it's a close second. And I found that if in taking store-bought puff pastry, that if you roll it out and you manipulate the dough with quite a lot of flour and sort of roll it out very, very thin, you almost in the end result get a similar texture to, because the burek dough is very thin and very flaky. And I mean, it's a beautiful, beautiful dish. And it's sort of the only recipe in the book that I've utilized sort of like a store-bought type ingredient, but I really wanted people who are using the book to have an option, because making burek is such a laborious, beautiful exercise to do it. It can be quite daunting for most people. So I wanted to provide an option for somebody that maybe wasn't that familiar with that to have a chance at the flavors and sort of the style of food. And it's a great thing to have, you know, a slice of it as, you know, for lunch. And another really great thing that sort of is one of my favorites is the palchinki with layered leeks and cheese. And it's a really beautiful, it's so delicate and so fine. It's really quite lovely. And it's, if you have company coming over for a lunch, like a slice of that with like a little green salad is really delicious, and or just on its own it's a really great thing. So yeah, I mean, all the recipes in the book were certainly, I felt very strong connections to, because they were either, you know, the recipes that I grew up eating, or, you know, family members were really great at making and we'd always have when we'd go over. And, you know, the Macedonian culture is very big and loud, and a lot of people and a lot of family. And so that was a big part of the upbringing and actually the style of the food, because it's all very sort of shared and easy to put together for a large group.
Yeah, and a lot of the things, like I wanted to try at least, you know, one thing before I talked to you, and I was able to do the chicken and orzo last night for my family, and they really loved it. And
good.
so yeah, I thought a lot of the stuff in the book I found was very much accessible. I could find most of it in like the local market with no trouble. Did you have some thought to that when you were like writing it? You wanted to make it accessible for people?
Yeah, I did. Absolutely. I mean, I think just going back to my first point of that, the fact that, you know, Macedonian cuisine is typically really about the produce. And I mean, there's certainly ingredients that are a little bit more specialty, like one being in the kozanak, which is like a traditional Easter bread. It's sort of like a sweet enriched bread. It traditionally we use mastika, which is like it's ground from a cherry tree, and it's a pretty specific, it's not something you're going to find in your local supermarket. It's a more of a specialty item, but it is certainly available and something that you can find. I was obviously able to find it when I was doing the book in Los Angeles. And yeah, so there are a few things, but I think that would be the exception to the rule. I think the majority of the recipes are things that you can certainly find. And at the end of the day, I think, you know, one of the things that I hope that I had translated through the book was that if you don't have something, it's really, Macedonian food is very forgiving. And, you know, if let's say there's a certain type of fish or, you know, an ingredient that we use, there's always substitutions. And I mean, I have people like message me on Instagram and send me things all the time, like, oh, could I use this or should I use that? And I'm always happy to lend a bit of advice if somebody's really keen. So
Yeah, I mean, you had a lot of really great fish recipes, and I don't really think I see that too often, and everything seemed very accessible, and it made me want to try them. I think you had the stuffed fish that I wanted to try. It looked really
that's
nice.
beautiful. Yeah, that's a really fun. It's funny. I still remember photographing. Like, it's interesting when you go through the book, you know, you have all these memories of points in your life when I mean, they're really a big part of our thing. We had this little setup, just to go back, it's like we had this tiny little house that we were renting in Los Feliz, which is a neighborhood in Los Angeles. And there was this one corner light that had beautiful, beautiful light. And we put up these like sheer white curtains, and we had this little rickety table, you know, sitting in the corner. And then we'd sort of bring in the props and set it up. And, you know, Oliver, my husband, would be there and he'd be shooting it and whatever. So it's sort of, I mean, you capture it in the image, but the back story of it is really quite fun to think about.
Yeah, because there was some other there were other photographs that were not just food related, but just nice pictures of like you know, outdoor shots and stuff like that.
So those images are from a photographer in Skopje, which is the capital of Macedonia. His name is Antonio Janenski, and he's a very talented photographer. And what ended up happening was in the summer of 2020, Oliver and I were planning, because we sort of, had the arrangement with Interlink to sort of get the book done. And over the course of that summer was sort of when we were doing the final changes to the book and improvements and edits and that sort of thing. And it was our intention. We actually had all our trips booked to go to Macedonia and do the photography ourselves. And it's really was quite unfortunate that we weren't able to go, because my husband hasn't been there. I've been before, but he hasn't had a chance to go. And so we had this trip book, and our intention was to do the landscape photography at that time. But then when we couldn't travel, we had to cancel. And so I found Antonio and reached out to him directly. And he was, I sort of told him about the project, and I said, I know you're on the ground there, and I know you've got some really beautiful photography. And so he's done most of the landscape photography for the book. And it was really lovely of him. He was very enthused by the project and was willing to share his body of work to incorporate in my body of work. And it was really a great thing. And I'm looking forward to hopefully meeting him in person in the future, because it's just been a delight.
This episode is sponsored by Culinary Historians of Northern California, a Bay Area educational group dedicated to the study of food, drink, and culture in human history. To learn more about this organization and their work, please visit the website at www.chnorcal.org. We also have the link on the bio. Did you know that, everybody that, if you look on Amazon, all the reviews, I think a few people were just like saying how gobsmacked they were by the book, and it just makes such a great gift for people. Did you know what would be such a gorgeous book when you made it, or when you opened it for the first time, when you got the box of books, were you like floored by it?
Oh, well, I definitely broke out in tears. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
a really emotional, it's a really emotional thing. This wasn't something like I said before, I wasn't brought into the project just to produce a body of work. It was really a passion thing that I did with no intention of it becoming, as well received as it has been. And I'm very grateful that it has been, but I genuinely put my heart and soul. Oliver and I, like, even just with the imagery, I think just for the food, I think we shot about 40,000 images across the board. And when I was actually pregnant with my first child, we sort of started to go through all the images, and you're sort of resting and this and that, and we sort of started to go through and really curate. So we really wanted it to be special. I didn't want it to be cut corners. And even with the rest, some of the recipes I tested 4, 5, 6 times, because I wanted them to be perfect. I wanted the reader to be able to execute the dish as easily as possible. And that was something that I had to also, because a lot of these dishes, when I make them at home, I sort of, yes, because I wrote the book and I know the recipe, but for me, these are the dishes I grew up eating. So a lot of it was just sort of touch and feel. And so I had to really take that and translate it into something that would, so I was like measuring everything, and, and so that took a lot of time. So I really did want the book to show well, and to, I didn't want to cut corners in any way or that. So I think as far as how well received it's been very humbling, and we're very proud of the book. And but yeah, I definitely got very emotional.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
It looks so good. And just, for a first time effort for anybody, I can't imagine how amazing it must have been to crack that open and look at the book throughout, because it's so beautiful from cover to cover. It's just gorgeous. Now,
thank you.
You are, as we said, a classically trained chef. Where did you begin with cooking? What inspired you to become a cook? Did you always want to become a chef, or did you plan on that when you were young?
No, I didn't plan on that when I was young. I was sort of like this kid that really loved to be in the kitchen. And from a young age, I really love to sort of take things that were, in the fridge or in the pantry and just sort of put things together. And sometimes they worked and sometimes they didn't. I'm a pretty creative person in the sense that I do enjoy like tactile activities, and um, it was always sort of there. And then like I said, I went to culinary school because I sort of really wanted to hone in on the craft of it. And I worked in restaurants, like while I was in university studying business, I worked in restaurants, and not so much in the back of a house, but in the front of the house. And sort of, I was sort of exposed to this sort of world, and I had done catering, for people. And it sort of just happened. I mean, it was certainly a strong passion and still is. Like cooking and food is a very strong passion for me. And I thoroughly enjoy cooking. My favorite thing to do is to have people over on a Sunday and do like a big feast and,
Yes.
have everyone around. Like it's by far my favorite thing to do. So I think going to culinary school was just sort of that happened in the time, and it felt right. And I really enjoyed it. And then like I said earlier when we were chatting, I ran a catering company for 7 to 8 years in Los Angeles, and cooked for quite a lot of people at that time. And it was really great because I did my internship when I did my culinary courses in Los Angeles. I did my internship at the Los Angeles Times Test Kitchen, and that was a really amazing experience to be able to learn how to really accurately test recipes and write recipes. And that was sort of when I was in that time, it was at the beginning of me starting the cookbook. And I think it was the most invaluable experience that I had, because it was amazing to see at that level, just really understanding the recipe writing and the cooking. And then I did food styling for some brands and for some other companies and stuff that had their own thing. So I was really enjoying, I never wanted to be a chef in a restaurant kitchen. That was sort of not where I wanted food to go for me. It was more of like the styling and the writing and that sort of thing those were the components of food that I genuinely really enjoyed, outside of just cooking for the friends and the family and stuff.
Now, you went from Los Angeles to Australia. Are you liking the food in Australia? Are there any
Oh,
culture shock things going on there?
no, the food in Australia is really quite special. I mean, especially Melbourne is known for great restaurants, and the markets here are really incredible. And I'm very lucky actually, because Melbourne has a very strong Macedonian community.
Oh,
There's
nice. I
a
didn't know that.
yeah, it's really nice. So Los Angeles didn't really. I mean, I have one girlfriend in Los Angeles she's one of my best friends now, but she's Macedonian. We met serendipitously in LA through a mutual friend, but in coming here, there's actually quite a lot of Macedonians living in Australia, particularly in Melbourne. And so it's been really nice actually, because I like to go to the markets most weekends, and there's quite a few really great markets that I love. And there are, Macedonian products and Macedonian purveyors that like you can buy sort of, I'll get like Ivar from, from one, or, Macedonian feta from another. So it's really good to have that exposure. But I find Melbourne is quite similar. It feels very similar to Toronto in that way. And sort of the city is very sort of vibrant. There's, the public transport's really easy. It's like a walkable city. And then there's a lot of restaurants and nightlife. And I mean, obviously that's pivoted a little bit with what's going on, but there's definitely a strong desire there. And there's definitely a lot of Macedonians here. So it's been really nice. I'm really enjoying the food in Melbourne. I highly recommend it to anyone thinking to come to Australia. It's a beautiful city.
Do you miss anything from Los Angeles, though? Are you able to get good Mexican food
Uh,
there?
no, not really. I tried to like make good Mexican myself, but no, I have to say there are certain things that I do miss. And there's certain products from Trader Joe's that
Yes.
if I could fill a suitcase with, I certainly would. But yeah, no, there's definitely some things that I miss. I mean, I do miss Los Angeles. It was home for me for a very long time, and we've got a really beautiful array of friends and stuff like that there. But yeah, the good Mexican and yeah, it's just different. It's just Australia is a little bit more removed. So you're sort of used to things taking longer and or ordering from overseas, and it's still quite lovely. And there's things that I've been here for 18 months. There's things that I'm loving here. And if I were to leave from Melbourne, I'd be wanting to bring with me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, if you were just to recommend like 2 dishes from the cookbook to listeners, what would you recommend?
I would say the palchinki, which is the crepe recipe that I was talking about before. It's in the meze chapter. It's towards the end of the chapter, and it's the leek and feta and ricotta filling. It's something that's quite unique and just really elegant and really sort of but not complicated. I mean, it feels really fancy, but it's not a difficult thing to kind of put together. That I would say that is a great recipe, is definitely one of my favorites. And then I would say also the spinach rice meatball soup is one of my favorites. And I love like the egg and lemon broth, and it's one of those recipes that kind of lasts in the fridge for, if you make a big pot of it, depending how, if it's just you or a bunch, you can have it for a few days on end. It's actually really delicious. And it's sort of, to me, it's just home. That soup is just home for me. So, but there's a lot I would recommend. I think it's really hot here. So I'm sort of thinking, I'm leaning towards the salads and the cooler stuff, but there's definitely a lot of great things to try in the book.
So what is next for you?
Well, at the moment, in terms of food, I am really just enjoying getting to talk to people about the book and, and cooking for our friends and our family and exploring. I don't have another book on the radar, but who knows?
Yeah, I always ask that question. People are like, "Are you kidding me? I just finished a book. What do you want from me?" And I'm like, "Sorry, I always had to ask," but No,
it's a great question. I think because I'm not like the culinary world, I want to keep it passion for me, and it's not career per se anymore. I really am cautious to just keep it as a passion and really enjoy it, and I'm okay with that. I think that there's a lot of, I think like with social media and with sort of things, there's a desire for some people to really take their culinary careers into like an amazing level, and you have to give it to them. But I think for me personally, this was such a heartfelt, it's a heartful thing for me to do. And I really poured myself in, and it took us 6 years to write the book, and it took us about 10 years to get from the beginning to where we are. So
wow.
it was definitely a labor of love, and I'm just sort of basking in it. It's like I'm really just enjoying that people are enjoying the book. And my favorite messages that I get from people are things like, my heritage is Macedonian, and my grandmother's passed away and we lost a connection to these recipes, and thank you so much for writing this book, because we're able to share the things of our childhood now with like the future generations, or things like the messages that I get from people when they're like, oh, I had no idea, and I've loved this recipe, and it's like going to become a staple in my home, like somebody that's not familiar with Macedonian food. I think I'm really just enjoying having people enjoy the book.
No, I've seen a lot. I mean, I don't see a lot of Macedonian restaurants. I know that the Bay Area has one, but oftentimes they get kind of lumped with Greek food. Do you think your book might help kind of bring it out a little bit, maybe create kind of a renaissance or revolution for Macedonian cooking?
I would love that. I would love nothing more. There was a restaurant here in Melbourne that was a strictly very authentic Macedonian recipe, and unfortunately, the gentleman had to shut down the restaurant. But when we came out of the last lockdown when we first moved here, it was the first restaurant because I'd known about this restaurant. I followed them on Instagram and all this sort of stuff. And I was like, I have to go to this restaurant. So literally the first booking that we made out of lockdown was to that restaurant. And I was so overwhelmed and so proud of him. And I knew who he was. And then he had heard who I was, and sort of he came and sat with us and we ate and we were talking about food. And I mean, it was just such and I just left there on airs. I was so proud of him and so excited, and loved seeing, you know, a restaurant that was strictly featuring Macedonian food to be so busy and so vibrant. And I would love nothing more than for there to be more Macedonian recipes outside of Europe and Macedonia, for sure. It'd be wonderful.
Well, Katerina, I really want to thank you for being on the podcast. I've really enjoyed getting to talk to you. And again, I just want to urge everybody listening to go out and get your cookbook because it's truly gorgeous.
Oh,
and
thank
just has
you,
some
Jean.
great recipes.
Thank you so much. It was such a delight. I'm glad we got to chat.
And I'm making that soup this weekend. You've got me sold on that. I'm really hungry now. I want that.
Okay, good. Well, you'll have to send me a message and let me know how it goes.
I will, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Okay, you too.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. That was my conversation with Katerina Nitsou, who wrote Macedonia, a cookbook. On Monday, we're going to have a circle back to talk to Peter Hertzman, who wrote the book 50 Ways to Cook a Carrot. He was a very fun guest to have and talk to, and I learned a lot about food science from him. He's going to be on Monday. On Wednesday, we're going to have Peter Sussman, the author of Decca, The Letters of Jessica Mitford, Committing Journalism. He's going to be on Wednesday, and we're going to talk about his upcoming art exhibit as well. And then we're going to have Lisa Amico Crystal talking about her book, The Art of Conversation. So that'll be up next week. Tune in then, and we'll have a wonderful series of conversations with all three of those writers. Until then, I hope you have a lovely weekend and keep cooking.